Hey guys, it's Shaylin and I'm here today with another writing video. So today's video is going to be really chill. I'm literally just doing a writing update. As you would maybe know, I've been on a bit of a baby little YouTube hiatus for the past month. It wasn't because of anything severe or anything. I honestly was just really behind on producing content for this channel. As some of you guys probably know, I do YouTube for another channel. I manage the Rizzy channel for my job. Having to make an extra video on my channel a week is really hard, and so normally the way I would do my channel is I would do a bunch of videos at once because it's just impossible to manage making 3 videos a week. With the pandemic, it's really hard to find times to film. For a while, myself and my roommates were all working from home. Really hard to find times where it was quiet enough, because obviously I need times where everyone is quiet and not doing anything. And it's hard when, like, obviously my roommates have like work calls they have to take. I live on a really busy street, a lot of yard work, construction. I just have very loud neighbors, plus also the fact that it was winter and so the sun would set super early, and so it's like I was looking for these super tiny windows of time to film. That was hard, and so obviously when I found those windows of time I had to prioritize them for filming videos for the Rizzy channel. So it was just being really hard to make content on this channel and I just needed a break. So I took about a month off. I'm great. I have a ton of content prepped for you guys. When I first went on hiatus, I left a little note on my community tab where I said, I'm going on hiatus. Are there any topics you'd like me to work on prepping videos for when I come back? And to my surprise, the by far most requested topic was to do a writing update. I was like, didn't I just do one of those? But then I realized that it was September and I just haven't clocked the passage of time. Thought I would just talk about my 2021 writing plans. These are chill videos. I invite you to tell me what you're working on in the comments because I love hearing from you guys what you're working on. The last writing vlog, I talked about how I'd made the decision to not apply to grad school. When I graduated university, my plan was to apply for grad school starting this year. So fall of 2021 is when I wanted to start grad school. And I made the decision to not do that because of the pandemic. I would have probably had to do grad school online and I just didn't want to do that. The reason I wanted to go to grad school, and the reason I still do want to go to grad school, is because eventually I want to teach writing. And so it's not just that I want to get my MFA because I just want to have an MFA. It is something that I need to do for my eventual career aspirations. I knew it was the right choice. It was difficult just because that had been my plan for so long. Like for years I had been like, this is when I'm gonna apply for grad school, this is what I'm gonna do, and I had those stages of my life laid out. And to kind of just put it all on pause in a very indefinite way where it was like, now I don't really know what I'm doing. It's like I didn't really have anything to look forward to, and I think probably a lot of people relate to this. We've all had to put things on hold because of the pandemic. I tried my best to kind of reframe everything and see this now extra year of time as time to write. Obviously, I still have other things going on. I do work full time, so it's not like I'm just at home writing. I kind of was like, maybe this extra year is a good thing. It's a year to save up money, which ultimately not a bad thing. Maybe I should just see this as, I don't really believe in signs. Okay, so when I say I see it as a sign, I don't believe in signs really. But I was like, maybe I should kind of like see it as a sign that I should just take this year and use it to finish my goddamn book. I have never gotten to the stage where I've queried a novel. I think this is something that always surprises people. I've never rushed the publishing process. I never queried when I was young because I always knew that my books weren't ready and I didn't want to do it wrong. I didn't want to just query a book because I had a book done. I wanted to query when I knew I had a book that was ready to query. And I finally have that. And so I've been trying to see this extra year of time as the Shaylin just finish writing Honey Vinegar and query it time. That's actually been going really well. I have been producing a lot of work since around September. Around September, obviously, that's when I made my peace that I wasn't going to grad school. I've been writing so much. Like, I have been producing more than I've produced. I mean, I haven't actually broken it down by word count, but it feels like I've been producing more regularly and just more often than I have in years. It's been nice, to be honest. It hasn't felt like a strain. It's something that I look forward to. It's been really great. I was doing draft 3, which was my big developmental edit. It was so much work. I started that in July. and I finished it up in October, but then there were some extra little bits that I had to keep doing. I'm done that draft. Honey Vinegar is now in the critiquing stage. So as of yesterday, I sent it to one of my critique partners. The way that I decided to do the critique is to just send it to 1 or 2 people at a time. I basically decided that I'd rather do a lot of little drafts than one giant draft, because I would rather get one person's feedback, implement it, and then get feedback from the next person on a draft that now has those edits. I think that that will give me a good idea of when the draft is basically done. You know, I'll do a few rounds of that and then probably just a really intensive line edit. I'm hoping that by the later in the year that puts me at a finished draft. I think I have a pretty good sense for when my work is complete and at a submittable stage, because I have been submitting short fiction and I have had a number of stories published. So I think I can tell when my work is at the quality it needs to be. And I think I have a good sense for where this draft is at. I hope that I don't have to do another huge edit. Obviously draft 3 was huge. I had to do pretty significant changes to almost every chapter. I'm hoping that now, as I get feedback from other people, I'll be able to implement feedback that's a bit more localized. So go fix this chapter, go fix this scene, go fix this subplot, rather than like doing a whole sweep of the whole book. My goal would be sometime in the fall to hopefully start querying it, because that seems like a realistic timeline for me. Honestly, it's insane. It's been almost a year since I finished the first draft. It feels like it hasn't been that much time at all. So the draft has progressed a good amount since then. I think part of the reason I feel fairly confident going into the critiquing stage is because I did have the book critiqued as I was writing it. The first third of the book was critiqued in over a series of 3 workshops while I was drafting it. And so I feel really good at least about like the first half of the book, because it was either critiqued or then directly influenced by what was critiqued. I have edited this book significantly. Like, it has changed and morphed a lot since I first started writing it. It's been such an amorphous process, so I do feel like the book is fairly far along, and I feel like I'm in a good place with it, and I feel like I will be able to query it this year, which is scary but very exciting. So I am drafting another book called Holding a Ghost. If you guys watched my NaNoWriMo vlogs, then you guys were around for that. I have had the weirdest journey with this book. Oh my goodness. When I'm done the first draft, I'm gonna make a whole video talking about the story of the time it took me 6 years to write a book. Basically, it was 3 entirely different books. Wow. I have never had a book go through an evolution like this one. I started the first draft of Holding a Ghost in its current, no, not really its current format, but kind of its current format, last March, right after I finished Honey Vinegar, like about a week after, and about a week before the pandemic started. So this book has been my pandemic novel, because I pretty much have entirely written it during the pandemic, which is so funny. I remember when I was excited to write this book, before I'd started writing it, I imagined myself like going to like a coffee shop on a beautiful spring day, writing, you know, while I drink my matcha and having these nice long writing days in cafes, because that used to be how I wrote. I was like that pretentious little shit writing in a coffee shop. That was me. I haven't done that in a year. Not the beautiful romantic journey that I thought it would be. I started writing it last March and it crashed and burned pretty badly. Not because the draft was terrible, I was just a mess emotionally. And then I ended up having to do a big Honey Vinegar draft anyway, so I had to put it aside for months. By the time I came back to it, my thoughts had evolved. If you watched my last writing update from September, it was right before I made the decision to restart Holding a Ghost. We were laying the groundwork, setting the scene there. I said in that video, I think I made the wrong narrative choices and maybe I need to restart it. And I think I said how I was feeling very neutral on it. And so I made the decision to restart it. And if you watched my NaNoWriMo vlogs, you guys heard me talk about this and you kind of know what's up with that. But basically, I restarted the book. It was a scary decision at first because I had envisioned that the book would go a certain way and be written in a certain style since the beginning. What had it been at that point? Not quite 2 years, year and a half. And so to just change it was a bit scary, but it was definitely the right decision. So what I did was I basically changed the narrative style. The book is now in basically a vignette style, and I changed the tense. So I restarted the book, I did NaNoWriMo. NaNoWriMo was great. I wrote more than I thought I would, about 30,000 words. It was great. I'm super happy with those 30,000 words. After NaNoWriMo, I put the book aside for a couple reasons. One, I just felt like I just did NaNoWriMo and it was like a lot. And so I just felt like I wanted to kind of decompress from that. I do have a very on-off drafting process. Like I don't just draft books straight through to the end. Like I write them for a bit, then I write other things, then I come back to them. Like I don't just write a book straight through. So knowing myself, I wanted some time away from it. And I just had a bunch of other things I wanted to do. So I took a couple months off from Holding a Ghost. I have not worked on it since November 30th. Now though, it is the time to go back to it. And I don't know if I'll draft it straight through, but I don't think I'll take any huge break. I do have 2 short stories that I'm also working on at the moment. They're both drafted. One of them I'm getting workshopped this week, so I'll probably take a pause to edit that. And then another one I finished the first draft of last weekend, so when that gets workshopped, I'll take a pause to edit that. So I think I'll take a couple pauses here and there to work on other things, but I don't plan to take any huge breaks. I do plan to just mostly write it straight through to the end. I'm like 32,000 words into the draft, and it's not going to be a long book. I expect the first draft to be 60 to 65K. Probably it'll take 2 months, maybe 3 months if I take longer breaks. So I don't know, I expect to be done this book April, May. It's not going to take very long. It's a really quite easy book to write. When I'm done that draft, I will be in a very weird spot because I'll have 2 books in the editing stage. At that point, I'll hopefully kind of finish up Honey Vinegar. That does make me start questioning, what do I do when I'm done that book? What do I draft? When I finished Honey Vinegar, I started drafting Holding a Ghost the next week. I was so desperate to. I don't feel that kind of desperation to start a new book, and I think it's just because Honey Vinegar took 18 months. It was really excessive how long it took to write that book, and so I was desperate to write something else. However, I don't really know when I'm gonna start another novel or what it's gonna be. Before I start another book, I want to get Honey Vinegar to the querying stage. Like, I do not want to start another book until Honey Vinegar is just out of my hands, and I also want to do my initial developmental edit on Holding a Ghost because I made the mistake when I was writing Honey Vinegar where I started writing my next book when I still had the big developmental edit to do, and then it just meant that I had to pause my draft for months and months and months to do that big developmental edit. So before I start my next book, I do want to get the biggest Holding a Ghost edit out of the way and basically finish Honey Vinegar. That will probably mean that I won't be starting another draft of a new novel until very late in the year, maybe November. Like, I might even just start one during NaNoWriMo. I have said in previous videos that the next book I write is going to be Lambs Playing God. This is a novel that is an expansion of a short story from my collection called Hold Me Under Till I See the Light. Some of you may have even read it. From the very beginning, it was always going to be a novel and a short story. When I got the idea, I knew this is a novel and a short story. I wrote the short story first. I've had really good success with that story. It's been published. It's probably one of my favorite stories I've ever written, maybe even my favorite. I've always looked forward to writing the novel, and I always did think that that would be the next novel I wrote. However, the way that I thought my project roster was that I was going to do Lambs Playing God, and then the next book was going to be Winter Houses. Thinking of doing Winter Houses first. Winter Houses is actually an older project, but I did the same thing I did with Holding a Ghost, where I took like an old project from like 2015, I changed everything, revived it. It's completely different. The project does technically date back to 2015, but the current version of it only dates back to like late 2019. I'd always thought I would do Lambs Playing God first just because I decided to take that project on earlier. They're both basically equally ready to write. This isn't based on which one is ready to go out of the gate. They both are. I could start writing either of them today if I wanted to. First of all is that I think Lambs Playing God would be a good book to do in my master's degree. Winter Houses, I just don't feel like it would be a good book to do in an academic setting. I don't know, it's messy. As well, I kind of see myself working in kind of 2 books at a time, you know, like with Honey Vinegar and Holding a Ghost. Those 2 books were the 2 books I kind of worked on in tandem. So I think probably the next 2 books I will also greatly work on in tandem. And I thought it worked out really well that the more complex of the projects was the first one. Winter Houses is definitely the more complex of those 2 books. Lambs Playing God is much more straightforward. Just like how Holding a Ghost, pretty straightforward, Honey Vinegar, giant mess. Since it worked out so well, maybe I should repeat that method and do the complex book and then follow it up with the simpler book, because the complex book, one would expect, will take longer to draft and will also have more extensive editing. I think easier to write the simpler one on the tail of the more complex one. I think part of the reason that I was thinking I wasn't ready to start Winter Houses is because I do have a lot of unanswered questions about that book. There are a lot of things I don't know what I'm doing. I have to keep reminding myself, Honey Vinegar is the best thing I've ever written in terms of a complete project. And I started that book not knowing what year it was set. And it turned out well because it revealed itself as I wrote it. The fact that it was super amorphous and I changed so much as I wrote it, I think is what made it good in the end. Winter Houses needs a similar process. I think going in not knowing much is probably going to be the best thing for the project in the end. That's what that book needs, is for me to go in with tons of questions and workshop the early chapters as I'm writing it and edit as I'm writing it. It's gonna need to change and evolve a lot, I'm pretty sure. Whereas I think Lambs Playing God is gonna be pretty straightforward. It's just a much simpler plot line. So that's kind of why, for the moment, I think I'm going to start Winter Houses probably late this year. That's my current novel writing plans. Obviously, these aren't goals, it's just kind of how I think the cookie will crumble. I thought I would talk a little bit about short fiction. I have been on my short fiction game. Like, I've been writing so much short fiction and it's really interesting. I have 2 collections that I've worked on. The first one, Pareidolia, is completely, the stories are all done. I just need to revise a few, and then I'm drafting my second collection, which is called Forgive Me, I'm on Fire. I have been writing so much short fiction. Oh my goodness. And it's really interesting because I actually was in a huge short fiction rut through a lot of 2020. 2020 was a rough year for me and short fiction. You may not know, because if you followed me through 2020, like, I published a lot of stories, but they were all stories I'd literally written like the year or years prior. If we go through the stories I wrote in 2020, they were all a mess. So the first story I wrote was called Technically a Baroness. It was an absolute disaster. I basically chucked it in the trash as soon as it was done. It needs to be completely rewritten if I ever want to pursue it. Then I wrote a story called Darling, I Fear for You, which I actually do like. And I had workshops. It's a fun time, but logistically it does not really make sense. So I've been struggling to make that work, and I'm not submitting it because I'm just saving it for my collection. Then I wrote a story called We the Girls that I actually like that story. I just don't submit it for various reasons that are very tangential and don't really matter, and so I won't get into that. Then I wrote a story called REM Girl. Like, that story was just a bit. Like, I wrote it in one sitting. I'm never gonna submit it. I'm probably never gonna do anything with it. At that point in the year, it was like June, and I was like, wow, I would love to just write a story that I can submit and work on. So I wrote a story called The Story Where the Tiger Kills the Wolf, and that story was such a letdown. When I started that story, I really thought I was onto something. The draft did not turn out well. If I ever successfully write that story, it will be the most complicated story I ever write. It'll be the most difficult story I've ever written. But that's why I haven't written it, because it's so hard. It's like got a dual narrative. It's a story about a man in a cult. His mom and him joined the cult when he was 8. She's since died, and that's really like shaken his belief system. He's married within the cult and his wife is like very devout, and the story takes place the night before they're supposed to like partake in like a mass suicide ritual, which is not great for him because he's like, I don't really want to die for this cult that I actually kind of want to leave. The story is interwoven with a bedtime story that his mother used to tell him when he was a child, which is where the title comes from, and it's about a bunch of scientists on an island. Basically, I wrote the first draft and I just wasn't happy with it. I think it definitely has potential, but it's so complicated and yet so non-complicated. It's complicated in terms of structure and information, but it's really lacking nuance in terms of character. None of the characters want anything complex for any complex reason. Like, the main character is literally just like, I'd rather not die. Like, that's his goal. He's just like, could we not die? And his wife is like, but actually I would really like us to. She's like, but babe, we made a death pact. Nothing really that original is revealed about their relationship. It's not working. So at that point, it was probably like July, and I was feeling pretty low. I had not produced a submittable story in all of 2020. I set my sights on this thing called the CBC Prize. It's like Canada's biggest short story prize. It's hosted by CBC. There's big prize money. Thousands of people submit. The thing about the CBC Prize is that the word count is very short. It's a 2,500 word maximum. I very rarely write stories that short. And so for me to write a story that's 2,500 words, I had to do it very intentionally. As we were leading up to the CBC Prize, it was August, I was like, this is exactly what I need. Part of why I feel like I've been in a rut is because I haven't been able to replicate the parameters I wrote under very successfully when I was in university, which was deadlines and a little bit of pressure. I really do produce my best work under a bit of pressure. So this was a really great way for me to replicate the situations I wrote in really well when I was in universities. It was the only way that I thought maybe would work to get me to write a story, and it actually worked beautifully. I feel like that story definitely clicked something for me. So I wrote a story called Zugzwang, submitted it to the CBC Prize, so I haven't been able to submit it elsewhere. And since then, I have written so many stories. So shortly after Zugzwang, I wrote a story called How You'll Feel After the War, which is actually like fantasy. It was my first time playing around with more speculative short fiction. I've never really done that before. I've written some stuff that's like surrealism, but like it's set in another world. Like it is fantasy. It's about a city where the sun has stopped setting. Follow a couple who, they're never named, we don't even know their genders, they're like anonymous narrators basically, and they find an oasis where night still falls. It doesn't have much of a submission feature because it's really niche, but I do plan to put it in my collection. Shortly after that, I wrote another story called Elise Holding a Deer Mouse, 1829, which this one's actually getting published. This one's since been accepted, so that one's forthcoming in the summer issue of Carousel, which is online. This one is pretty short. It's like less than 3,000 words. It's about these two people who are in an art gallery observing a set of 4 paintings. Each section begins with like a description of the painting, and then there's kind of like a bit of their interaction and also background on their relationship. It's really pretentious, and when you read it, you will probably think, I think Shaylin just watched Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and the answer to that is yes. Then I wrote a story called How to Slaughter that I started in October, but I've had to put aside to do NaNoWriMo, and then I finished in December. I've since revised that one. I have a vlog coming up of me editing it. It's so long, guys. This story is over 7,000 words. It's the longest story I've ever written. It's gonna be a pain to submit, but I really like it. It's honestly too complicated to explain. There's rabbits, it's gay. I got nothing else for you. Then wrote another story, because I've just been really on my bullshit lately, called I Am a Wolf in Wolf's Clothing. I think I started that one in December, and then I had a tragic experience where I lost the work, but then I was able to recover it like a month later, and now my workshop is workshopping that one this week, so I'm really excited to get that one workshopped and then be able to submit it. It's about this really unhinged child who finds out that her dad is a serial killer. He like takes her because he's like on the lam to northern Alaska for them to like hide out in the polar night. When she learns that her dad is a serial killer, it kind of causes her to start contemplating her own desires and her own capabilities. I had a lot of fun with that one because the main character is just a piece of work. And then most recently, last week, I finished a story. It's called Tabula Rasa. This one is also about weird teenage girl, because I've just been writing a lot of stories about weird teenage girls lately. It's about a weird teenage girl whose mom picks up a hitchhiker and lets the hitchhiker move into their house, into the bedroom that belonged to her sister who went missing 3 years ago. And her mom has kind of like kept her sister's bedroom like pristine and untouched and not letting anyone go in there. And the main character has always wanted that bedroom because it's a nicer, bigger bedroom than her own, and she's thought it's unfair that she can't have it because her sister's obviously not using it because she's probably dead. So that kind of creates like the initial tension between them, and the story is kind of a nothing happens story. I've been trying to write a nothing happens story, which is quite simply a story where nothing really happens, and it's just like subtle character tensions for years. Tabula Rasa was my 30th short story since I started seriously writing short fiction in late 2016. I've been trying to write a nothing happens story ever since. I think I finally read a nothing happens story. But basically it's just about how this hitchhiker who's now living in their house, Marcella, her presence kind of causes Daphne and her mom to examine how her sister's disappearance has maybe affected them in ways that they haven't been ready to acknowledge. And the main character is just, she's such a piece of work. She's a little shit in the way that sometimes teenagers can be little demons because they have no perspective on life, and so they think that all of their problems are like the most valid problems. She's very like weirdly egotistical about a lot of weird things. Like she has some weird kind of superiority complexes and this weird need to like kind of assert power over other people to fulfill them. She's a weird kid, but like also kind of very normal. Basically what I'm saying is I've been thriving with short fiction. I have tons of stuff to submit, so it's really exciting. My second collection is shaping up very, very nicely, and I'm really excited about how the stories work together and the tone that's being created in that book. Nothing else for me to really ramble on about. So I hope that this was interesting, even though it was just me talking about my projects, but you guys seem to like this, okay? I'm not making this for egotistical reasons, okay? It was requested many times. I'll close this off now. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always send me an ask on Tumblr, and I'll see you in another video. Bye.